carriage roof sloped sharply from the ridge, black with years of soot and engine grease. The winter wind tears across it at 40 miles an hour, carrying grit and smoke from the locomotive ahead. On either side, the dark countryside falls away. Paddocks, fence posts, the occasional pale smear of a farmhouse rushing past and gone. The night is clear and bitterly cold. A full moon hangs over South Gippsland. A man lays face down on this slope. His hands are in the pockets of his gabardine overcoat. His head lower than his feet. There's a narrow ridge of metal at the roof's edge, and that's the only thing stopping him from sliding into the dark gap ahead. He's not moving. His fingers are black with the same soot that covers the roof around him. The palms of his hands have left faint impressions in the grime. The marks of a man who crawled, who was on his hands and knees up here in the dark and in the wind and the cold, while the train thundered through the Strzelecki ranges below him. The train begins to slow. A yellow light sweeps across the carriage roof as the locomotive approaches the signal box at Korumburra station. For just a moment, the shape on the roof is fully illuminated. From below, from the tender, a fireman named Frederick Mills has climbed up the coal pile. He's been watching that shape since Nyora. He's been telling himself it's a bag, a piece of canvas, something fallen from a platform, that his eyes must be deceiving him. But in the light of the signal box, Frederick Mills sees a man's boot. He sees a hand. He stares for a long moment at the carriage roof, and the train comes to a stop. Welcome to Struth, a podcast about the most extraordinary true stories in Australian history. Today's story is set in South Gippsland, Victoria, in the winter of 1919. It involves a young man, a borrowed rifle, and a train journey that should have taken 3 hours. All of this adds up to a mystery that was never satisfactorily explained. I'm your storyteller, Mark. Join me on the 6:30 to Gippsland. Alexander Gordon Eastman is 21 years old. He works as a butcher in Prahran, an inner suburb of Melbourne, and lives with his family. His aunt, Miss Annie Maria Smith, and various other relatives in a comfortable working-class household in the south of the city. He is, by every account that will later be given of him, an ordinary young man. Decent, hard-working, well-liked. His brother Herman will later describe him as a man who drank little. On the evening of Saturday, the 7th of June 1919, Alexander Eastman is preparing for a weekend in the country. He's borrowed a rifle from Herman, the kind of thing you bring for a country visit. Plenty of rabbits, open paddocks. He's packed a Gladstone bag, and he and his aunt, Miss Smith, are travelling to Korumburra, a farming town about 70 kilometres southeast of Melbourne, to visit another aunt, Mrs. Elizabeth Thompson. It's a perfectly ordinary plan. A borrowed rifle, an overnight bag, and a train heading south. They leave from Hawkesburn station, and at Caulfield they change onto the South Gippsland branch line, the 6:30 p.m. service that will carry them through the outer suburbs and then out into the open country south of Dandenong, through the flat reclaimed swampland of the Korumburra Basin, and into the forested hills of South Gippsland and beyond. Long-time listeners to the show will remember a particular piece of swamp in South Gippsland that we visited in the very first episode of the show, on the trail of a very different mystery. But back to the story. The train's warm enough. Miss Smith will later say that Alexander seemed perfectly well. They had dined before leaving. At Dandenong, however, something changes. Alexander Eastman stands up. He tells his aunt that a friend of his is on the train, a man named Morrison, and that he'd like to go and have a chat with him. He expected to meet Morrison at either Caulfield or Dandenong. His brother Herman will later confirm that this conversation took place with him as well. So whatever theories we develop about this Morrison, we can be sure that it wasn't just Miss Smith mishearing or misunderstanding something. Eastman says he won't be long, and he steps out of the compartment. Miss Smith is left to sit alone. Outside the window, the Dandenong platform slides past. The doors close, and the train moves south into the night. She doesn't see her nephew again. He doesn't return to his seat. There are approximately 45 kilometres of line between Dandenong and Korumburra, and the train makes several stops along the way. Cranbourne, Prahran. It takes perhaps an hour, and then the line curves slightly north and the train pulls into Korumburra station. Miss Smith gathers her things. She looks for her nephew. She checks the compartments near her own. She walks toward the smoking carriage, which is where a young man might linger for conversation. But Alexander Eastman, as far as she can tell, is no longer on this train. She stands on the platform at Korumburra in the cold dark of a June evening. Her ticket is in her nephew's pocket. They both are. He'd been carrying them. A railway official helps her sort that out. It's no big problem. And she's not unduly alarmed at this point. He must have missed the connection at Dandenong. He'll be on the next train. So she makes her way to Mrs. Thompson's house. She'll wait for him there. But she's still waiting when the telegram arrives. While Miss Smith is walking to her sister's house, the 6:30 to Gippsland is still running. After Korumburra, the line lifts into the Strzelecki Ranges. The landscape becomes steep and forested, a different country entirely from the swamp and farmland behind. The train climbs through Lang Lang, Nyora, Loch. By the time it reaches Nyora, something important has already happened. The van, a goods carriage that had been coupled between the locomotive tender and the passenger carriages, has been detached. Whatever gap existed between the tender and the first passenger carriage is now one step closer. The fireman that we met in the opener, Frederick Mills, is working hard in the tender. At some point during the later stages of the journey, he climbs the coal pile in the bright moonlight, and he can see the carriage roof behind him. He notices something. He's not certain at first what he's looking at, and he watches it. As the train approaches Korumburra and slows for its final approach to the station, the light from the signal box sweeps across the carriage roof. Frederick Mills sees clearly what's on it. The train comes to a stop at Korumburra at approximately 10 o'clock in the evening. Constable C.G. Marchese of the Korumburra Police attends the station. The body is lifted carefully from the carriage roof and it's carried into the railway station waiting room. When found, the body is face down. The head nearly 2 feet below the level of the feet. The hands are in the pockets of the gabardine coat. Every passenger on the train is questioned. Every passenger is asked to view the body in the hopes of an identification. One man, a sawmiller named Thomas Marchbank, travelling from Ruby, identifies the body. Sort of. He's seen the man before. After the train left Dandenong, Marchbank went to a first-class compartment to retrieve his bag. There was one other person in the compartment. Marchbank spoke to him. The man seemed Marchbank will later say, a bit confused. He didn't answer. Marchbank didn't think much of it at the time and moved on. That man, of course, was Alexander Eastman, a second-class ticket holder, alone in a first-class compartment, confused and non-responsive, less than an hour before his body was found on the roof of the train. The examination of Eastman's body and his belongings produces a picture that is, at first glance at least, reassuring, and then on closer inspection, deeply strange. On his person, there are 2 watches, a gold watch and a silver watch, both in their pockets, both undamaged. There are gold cufflinks in his shirt sleeves. And there are the train tickets we mentioned, both his and his aunt's, which he'd been carrying. There's a string pocket knife, a large one, 3 halfpence and a farthing, 3.5 pence in total. His Gladstone bag's also recovered and it contains nothing to eat or drink. His rifle is accounted for. And then there are the absences, the things that weren't there. His aunt, Miss Smith, is clear on one point. When she last saw her nephew at Dandenong, he was wearing a gold band ring on the little finger of his left hand. It was engraved with his initials, AGE. She's asked whether it might have slipped off. She is certain it could not have. It fitted too well to permit of its dropping off, she says. That ring is not on his finger, it's not in his pockets, and it's not anywhere noticeable on the train. And then there's the money that wasn't there. His aunt, Lavinia Smith, a different aunt who also knew him, will later testify that she was sure Alex had a few pounds with him. Part of his wages, she believes, and perhaps even more. He had recently sold a saddle for £4. So in his pocket, at the time of his death, there was only 3.5 pence. But he should have had several pounds. But it's the watches, both of them, that proved to be the most curious items found on Eastman. 1 gold, 1 silver, both stopped, both showing exactly the same time, 10 minutes past 7, which leads you to believe that something physical, violent, happened at 10 minutes past 7. By 7 o'clock, Eastman would have been approaching or passing through the outer suburbs south of Caulfield, heading toward Dandenong. By 10 past 7, barely 40 minutes into the journey, something happened to Alexander Eastman, something that stopped both of his watches at exactly the same moment. The other curious aspect, of course, is that no one ever explained why the man was carrying 2 watches in the first place. No one at the inquest raised it as a matter of requiring resolution. The watches are simply noted in the record and not returned to at all. Their time of stopping not seen as important. Speaking of the inquest, it was held on the 25th of June 1919 at the Melbourne City Morgue before Deputy Coroner Mr. A.H. Phillips. 11 witnesses gave evidence. A post-mortem examination had been conducted by Dr. C.H. Mollison. Mollison's finding was as follows. Alexander Eastman died of suffocation caused by the regurgitation of food into the air passages. In plain terms, he choked. The suffocation, Mollison confirms, could not have been caused by fumes from the engine. Another important factor was that the post-mortem revealed no sign of mental disturbance, and this was certainly corroborated by all who knew him. Detective Sergeant P. Sullivan, who was dispatched to Korumburra on the 9th of June, presents the theory at the inquest that became the official account. Sullivan believes Eastman, after leaving his aunt at Dandenong, made his way to a first-class compartment. Whether by mistake or by design is unclear. He was holding a second-class ticket. In fact, he was holding two. When he encountered Marchbank, Sullivan theorises that Eastman panicked, perhaps mistaking the sawmiller for a railway official who might challenge his ticket, perhaps simply overwhelmed by the wrong compartment situation. So he tried to get back, perhaps in a bit of panic, and he found the corridor door connecting to the second-class section locked. The assistant guard, Frederick Girdleston, confirms he personally locked that sliding door before the train reached Dandenong. Sullivan believes Eastman, unable or unwilling to unlock the door and fearing a ticket inspector, instead climbed onto the roof. He would have used the steps at the end of the carriage van to do this. They were accessible. They were also manageable for a fit young man, even on a moving train, if the young man in question was frightened enough and not thinking clearly. And we do have Marchbank's statement that Eastman did, for whatever reason, seem quite rattled, unable to even carry out a simple conversation. Another important piece of information brought up at the inquest came from a railway ganger named William Reid, and he provided this crucial detail. Between Dandenong and Korumburra, the line passes beneath a low overhead bridge, approximately 300 yards past Clyde Station. Reid had measured it. A man seated upright on the carriage roof would certainly have had his hat knocked off. In fact, Reid stated that if he was sitting up as the bridge was reached, it's quite possible he would be struck and forced to lower his body suddenly. Guard Charles James added that it would be impossible to see that bridge approaching on a dark night. The reason that Reid was involved in the inquest at all is that he indeed found Eastman's hat near that bridge at Clyde. The post-mortem showed that Eastman had a small gash on his chin when he was found, and that's consistent with striking a bridge while flattening himself the best he could against the roof. So the abbreviated version of Sullivan's theory: Eastman climbs to the roof in a panic. He encounters the bridge, takes a blow to the chin, and flattens himself. The mild concussion, the cold, the terror, all combined with the earlier dinner, cause him to vomit. As he's laying face down on a sloping roof and unable to right himself, he aspirates, and he's dead before the train reaches Nyora. The coroner, Mr. Phillips, considers all of this. He calls the case most extraordinary, and his formal finding reads: on the night of June 7 at Korumburra railway station, Alexander Eastman was found dead on the roof of a railway carriage, having died by suffocation. There is no evidence to show how he got there, but I am of the opinion that it was by his own act. He describes Eastman as a decent, hard-working young fellow, and he states that foul play was clearly proved not to have occurred. Case closed. But is it? Over 100 years later, let's look honestly at what the evidence supports and what it doesn't. Theory 1. The panicked ticket dodger. Sullivan's reconstruction is the most complete, the most evidentially grounded, and, of course, is the official account. It's supported by the locked door, the hat at the Clyde Bridge, the chin wound, the soot racks on the roof, which, most importantly, show only Eastman's crawling, no evidence of any other person, and Mollison's finding that he died by choking on vomited food. These are not small things, they form a coherent chain. But the theory has a problem at its very core, and the problem is this: Alexander Eastman had a valid ticket. He was in the wrong compartment, yes, a first-class compartment with a second-class ticket, but this is not, by any stretch, a hanging offence. It's not even a significant one. A railway guard or inspector might have just asked him to move to the correct carriage. In the worst case, he might have paid a small surcharge. Probably the embarrassment would have been the worst thing that happened to him. But he would not have been thrown from the train. He certainly wouldn't have been arrested. He would not have faced anything more serious than a mild inconvenience. And so for Sullivan's theory to hold, We must believe that Alexander Eastman, a 21-year-old butcher from Prahran, a decent, hard-working young fellow who drank little, was so terrified of a ticket discrepancy that he climbed onto the roof of a moving train in freezing winter conditions rather than simply explain himself. We must believe that a man who had done nothing wrong, who was holding valid tickets for both himself and his aunt, responded to the presence of a fellow passenger in the compartment by crawling out a window and onto the roof in the dark. Most extraordinary indeed. Additionally, the component of the testimony given by the assistant guard Frederick Girdleston stated that the door between the compartments was indeed locked. However, he also added that it could easily have been opened by a key, of course, or also something such as a large pocket knife. A large pocket knife, as we know, was found on Eastman's body, and surely this would be a less extreme option for Eastman, a man who spent his days using knives. The coroner's own language too is telling. He doesn't say he is satisfied Eastman got there by his own act. He says it's his opinion. In a legal setting, from a man of the law, that distinction is not accidental. Theory 2. Foul play. The ring. Miss Smith is unequivocal. It fitted too well to fall off. It was engraved with his initials and it was gone. And the money. A man expected to be carrying several pounds in wages plus the proceeds of a saddle sale was found with 3.5 pence. But against this theory, both gold and silver watches were left, as we know, untouched. Gold cufflinks were still in his shirt sleeves, also undisturbed. And again, it's important to note there were no drag marks on the soot-covered roof, only Eastman's own crawling tracks. No signs of a struggle on the body beyond the chin gash. No witness reports of any disturbance on the train that would suggest a robbery took place. These are some of the reasons the coroner was satisfied there was no foul play, but his reasoning, in the record, is stated as conclusion rather than argued in full. The missing ring is noted, and the missing money is noted, and neither is resolved. A man who robs a body on the roof of a moving train and takes the ring and cash but leaves watches and cufflinks is a strange kind of robber. But then, a man who climbs to the roof of a moving train rather than to explain a ticket discrepancy is an even stranger kind of traveller. Strangeness in this case does not belong to only one theory. Theory 3. The bridge. The haddock Clyde, the chin wound, Ridd's testimony that the bridge would knock off a seated man's hat. This is well supported, and almost certainly part of what happened to Eastman on the roof. The question is whether the bridge strike is the cause of his death, or a consequence of him already being on the roof for other reasons. Sullivan's reconstruction treats it as the latter, a component of a larger sequence. If Eastman was already feeling a bit sick, already confused, the bridge strike could have been the event that completed a crisis already well underway. The investigators noted that a direct strike severe enough to kill would likely have thrown Eastman from the roof entirely. And yet he was, as we know, found on the train. So the bridge theory on its own explains the hat and the chin, but not necessarily the death. Theory 4. Something was wrong before the scene on the roof. Thomas Marchbank finds Eastman in the first-class compartment, confused, unresponsive. This is, of course, before any roof climbing has occurred. This is still relatively early in the journey, south of Dandenong, while the train is still in the flatter country. Both watches stop at 7:10, 40 minutes after departure from Hawkesbury. So what happened at 7:10? The post-mortem found no signs of mental disturbance and no indication of illness as a cause of death. Mollison does not describe any pre-existing medical condition. Eastman's family certainly does not raise one. But Marchbank describes a man who could not respond to a direct question. Not a man making a calculated decision to pretend he wasn't there, but a man who seemed, to a stranger's eye, completely absent, had those faraway eyes. Whether a medical episode could explain the confusion, the watches, and the bizarre subsequent behaviour is a question the inquest did not pursue. It's not a question that the evidence answers. And in amongst all of these theories, there is Morrison. Eastman told his aunt he was going to find a friend named Morrison, who he expected to be on the train. His brother Herman confirmed that Eastman had also mentioned the expectation of a meeting with Morrison to him. But Morrison, ladies and gentlemen, is never found. He's never identified. He's never traced. No one comes forward. No one in any of the inquest testimony says, "I'm Morrison," or "I know who Morrison is," or "I saw Eastman with Morrison." The mysterious friend who prompted Eastman to leave his aunt's compartment and step into whatever came next simply does not appear anywhere in the official record. This could mean that Morrison was not on the train, that Eastman was mistaken, or that Morrison missed it and Eastman was simply wandering the carriages when he ended up in the wrong compartment. It could mean that Morrison was on the train, had the conversation, and subsequently had very good reason not to come forward. It's not possible to know which of these is true. It's not possible to know whether Morrison matters at all. This could be just a really bizarre coincidence in a really bizarre case. And he sits at the edge of this case, like a figure glimpsed through steam on a dark train platform. He's there long enough to register, but gone before you can be certain. Deputy Coroner Phillips called this case the most extraordinary he had encountered. He was careful in his formal finding to separate what the evidence proved from what he merely believed to be true. The evidence told him how Eastman died. It did not tell him why he was on the roof. I am of opinion that it was by his own act. That is the official account of what happened on the 6:30 to Gippsland on the 7th of June 1919. A young man with a valid ticket got onto the roof of a moving train in freezing conditions, struck an overhead bridge and choked to death on his own vomit. It's possible. There's no single piece of evidence that contradicts it. But it doesn't explain the missing ring. It doesn't explain the missing money. It does not explain the watches or the confused man in the first-class compartment who would not answer a direct question. And it does not account for, nor explain, Morrison. And so Alexander Eastman was buried without answers. The inquest file was closed. The detectives, as they had to, moved on to other cases. The 6:30 to Gippsland ran the following Saturday, and the Saturday after that, and the Saturday after that. Through the winter into the spring, through the rest of 1919 and the years beyond, carrying passengers from Hawkesbury south, through Caulfield and Dandenong, and Clyde and Nyora, and all the way to Korumburra, past the bridge that knocks off a seated man's hat. The heritage-listed Korumburra station still stands, a red brick Queen Anne building constructed in 1907, still serving the line. The platform where Frederick Mills raised the alarm on a cold June night in 1919 is still there. And somewhere in the holdings of the Public Record Office, Victoria, if it survived, there is an inquest file from June 1919. It contains 11 witness testimonies, a deputy coroner's finding, and at the bottom of it, a word that carries a great weight for such a small word. Opinion. Truth. Thanks again for listening. Struth is an independent podcast produced right here in Tasmania in my shed. Hopefully you can't hear too much of the rain that's falling on the roof as I record this one. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, leave a review, tell someone about it. It helps more than you know. Independent podcasters are all up against the algorithm gods, and every little bit helps. If you'd like to hear more Struth, please come and check us out on Patreon, Struth Premium. You get a bonus episode each week, and you also get 1 week early our regular feed, completely ad-free. There's some links in the description below. Thanks again for listening. I really appreciate it. I'll catch you next time.